We're going to start with the discussion about the Marginalized Voices framework. And we chatted a bit about this in our online session together previously, but it's so important and it can play such a pivotal role in the work that you do and the mindset that you have to go about your everyday professions. And we thought it important to go through again in a little bit more detail to try and apply a little bit more to the way you can run and work in your libraries and work with communities to support the building and the finding of better data. Now, the Marginalized framework, again, it provides a roadmap so that you can look at voices that are excluded from data processes and data themselves. It creates typographies to start to build a way to look at and understand different types of voices that are marginalized and why they're marginalized, what are the factors that lead to their marginalization. And importantly, it can lead to discussions and strategies for including these voices in your community, in conversations and discussions and data. So what can you do with your collective knowledge within your library and within your community to push back against these factors that have led to marginalization to build better data? And this is so important for libraries to be a part of, because libraries, as we've said over and over, are such integral parts of their communities. There's so much embedded institutional knowledge and trust that they have that they can use their own knowledge as well as bring in voices that may be not comfortable being part of other conversations, or just maybe need the stimulus or the incentive to get together, somebody calling them and creating a structure and a place where they can feel safe and brave to discuss their realities and talk about the challenges that they see in data and how their voices and the voices of their peers can be better and more accurately reflected in the data, so realities can be known and better policy and change can be made. Now, again, as we've said before, this is just a starting place. We see this framework as something that you can use in your library and adapt to the unique realities that your library faces. Now, the first of these, the framework is the unknown voices. These are people who are invisible to mainstream society. They come in many shapes and flavors throughout the world. And they're all very important, but we may not all face and see them in the same ways. And that's important for your libraries to consider and think very creatively and thoughtfully about, is who are these unknown voices? The thing that's important about libraries is many of these unknown voices actually may be known to you in the libraries. For example, one unknown voice that's very commonly excluded and marginalized from data are people who are homeless. They are invisible to society because of where they sleep, because of where they live, because of the choices that they make that are very hard to access. And so a lot of people don't know about them. We know how hard it is just to get a number about how many homeless people there are in certain cities. Yet we also know that a lot of homeless people visit libraries. They use the libraries for the very important services that they provide. And the libraries are a place that many of these people find safe, find they can have value to, and they can feel like they belong. And so libraries can actually use their knowledge of some of these people who visit the library, engage with them, and find ways to talk with them and create spaces for them to be able to express their realities and create strategies and plans for the realities to get incorporated into data going forward. The next one are the silent voices. These are people who, for various reasons, don't have the capacity to vocalize their realities. There's a lot of overlap between these, and there's a lot of intersectionalities as well. The reasons for individuals being silenced out of data can be actually very purely physical. They may not be able to speak certain languages. They have limited speaking abilities, or their abilities in speaking or communication may not be ones that are the ways that communication is used for data collection. And again, these people also use libraries, and they see libraries as trusted places, and their voices are so important to include in data, and the libraries can find ways to include them by working together and using their place in society. There's a lot of voices that are muted. These muted voices are because of the stigmas that society places on them, and the lack of respect and validation, whether directly or indirectly, explicitly or tacitly, that are given to them. Again, these are also people that very often will frequent libraries, and that libraries can engage with and find ways to engage and to feel safe, and find ways to make their voices unmuted, to give them the agency and the microphone to speak. There are many unheard voices as well, and that's just because of the realities of doing data collection. Uh, this isn't a good excuse, but it's part of the reality of the way a lot of data plans are developed. Um, it's hard to reach people that don't have mobile phones or computers to do that sort of technological engagement. It's hard to reach people who don't live in houses. You can't go door to door knocking on them. It's very hard to reach people who may speak different languages because you need to spend a lot of money on interpreters to work with them. And so because of these issues, those voices just aren't included in data. And there's a lot of ways that data collection efforts try to overcome that or do small subsets. But really the reality is these voices tend to be largely unheard in data sets. And the only way to truly make the realities known from across a variety of complexities is to make sure that they can have their voice. And so this is another place where libraries have the opportunity to reverse this trend. And the final category are the ignored voices. These people are ignored because of just the way statistics works. We see bell curves and averages. Anybody who falls outside the average is often not discussed. Often when there's a list of data and categories are made, whether by ethnicity or race or language spoken or socioeconomic status, buckets are made. And there could be buckets that are very small with very few numbers of people. It's often easier during statistics to take these small buckets and put them into one other category called other. Well, not only socially is this inappropriate because it adds to the othering that we see so much going on, but the realities are so different amongst and within this group called other that those realities have to be disaggregated and put out in their own so that those unique voices can be tailored and addressed. Otherwise, we're just going to keep talking and building programs relevant for the majority. And that's not something that any of us wants to do. There are many factors that impact representation. Social and cultural ones are very crucial, and they're very difficult to overcome and engage with in ways that are respectful, that don't put outside expectations, that make sure everybody feels safe. For example, in some cultures, in some religions, women may not feel safe leaving their home. They may not be able to engage independently. And so because of this, they may not have the same opportunity and access to be part of data collection efforts. How you engage, how you try and go about that to make sure that these women's voices are heard is something that needs to be done thoughtfully, but using the trust of the library and starting from the ground up and building respect and building thoughtful, reflexive approaches can be ways to make sure that these voices that have social and cultural limitations, keeping them out of data, can be overcome without jeopardizing the social and cultural values that they hold very dear to them. Communication is also an important factor. This has to do with language skills and abilities that people have, people's access to technology, if communication has to be done only through certain types of technologies. All of these ways that communication is done can impact significantly representation. Time is also huge. Many people have complex lives. They have multiple jobs, they have kids, they have transportation. Do they even have time to participate in data collection efforts, let alone at the same time when somebody might be available to collect those data? People's time is very valuable. It's very limited. Often data collection doesn't provide compensation. So how do you get people to want to share, to spend that time with data collection efforts to allow their realities to be known? Historical experience is also crucial to consider. There's been a very sad and tragic way that individuals throughout the US and around the world have been abused during data collection. And if not directly abused, they may feel extracted, that their time is not well spent, that people just keep coming asking the questions and they don't get anything from it. And so giving people an appetite and a desire to participate, and a feeling that if they share something good, positive change can happen from the knowledge, from the realities that they share, can occur. And so having to overcome this historical experience is something that's a bit of a challenge, but needs to be considered and addressed when trying to build representation of different voices. And the last example here is resources. People, we discussed technology and other access to communication devices. That's significant. Cars, how are people going to be able to get to the place where the discussions may occur? Or how are they going to be able to host somebody, say, in their home? What are the resources necessary and how can those be overcome? These are just a few factors that affect representation. We don't pose them here to give an idea that it's impossible or that it's a task that is so complex and challenging that it can't be done by a library. In fact, we think that libraries, public libraries, are absolutely positioned with the knowledge and the connections to be able to understand the complex factors that affect representation and to find ways to incorporate those into planning to make sure voices are heard. But they are nonetheless things that need to be taken very seriously, very thoughtfully, and built into planning and respected. In addition to these 5, there's many, many others that you may be aware of and uncover in your processes. So before we move on, let's think about these marginalized voices, the reasons for marginalization, the kinds of voices that you may have in your community that are marginalized, that are excluded from data processes and the data themselves, the factors that impact those, and the way you go about your life and your work that may potentially build and add to that marginalization and that exclusion, but also things in your knowledge that you can do, your experiences that can help it. And then also the limitations, things that you know that you can't do, that you'll never be able to see, or they'll be difficult for you to see, if not for other people supporting you. So what are the limits of your knowledge? What are the limits of your power? What is the limits of what you can do to understand realities or to bring new voices in? So take a moment, think about yourself and your work and your knowledge and your positionality, and be a little reflexive before we move on to the next step.